Welcome to Queering Arthur, a podcast where you can join us in exploring queer interpretations of Arthurian legend. I'm Kelly Oakler.
And I'm Dr. Shyla Rad.
Today we're talking about the history of the Britons by Nennius from 828 CE.
This podcast is for mature audiences. This episode contains a history of slurs, theoretical analysis of sexual activity, a mention of objectification of women in media, and sexual innuendo. For fun.
If any of this sounds like something you don't want to hear, then please take care of yourself and skip this episode.
Last time we talked about the 6th century, so since this next entry in the White Anthology is from the 9th century, we're going to not only have a high-level cultural view using our hermeneutic satellite metaphor, but it's also going to move over time.
So since my more special interest has always been in the 18th century, and that's a little bit more of what I'm informed of, I'm really gonna lean on Shyler here to help inform me of the history surrounding these stories and the historical context they take place in.
I have so many feelings about what you just said, Kelly. Kind of gives me a bubbly...
Could never stop you talking about your special interest, nor would I want to.
Okay, so let's look at Egadavon, a medieval Welsh poem. It's over 2,020 lines and 103 stanzas, written around the year 600 CE. It provides a glimpse into the cultural context of the Gododdin. The Gododdin were a Brythonic people of the Hen Ogledd, which means Old North. The Old North was a region of Britain, kind of modern day between England and Scotland. A Gododdin commemorates the Battle of Catraeth, where the Gododdin warriors, led by King Menthag Muinfar, faced the Angles. It reflects the heroic ethos of the time, praising the fallen warriors. While the Battle of Catraeth was a defeat for the Gododdin, it endures because it is a record of the struggles and bravery of the native Britons against the Anglo-Saxons.
So this is our first real mention of Arthur, right, as opposed to in Gildas, where there's no actual person named Arthur that we can point to. So this is where they sort of take the story and bring about their heroic figure, their superhero of the time, right?
Yeah, Gildas mentioned some specific people, some Arthur-like figures, but wow, I love that idea of Arthur as a medieval superhero. So interesting. So, Kelly, how is Arthur a superhero? That's your thing.
He's a superhero in that he's this larger-than-life figure that's sort of helping or motivating them towards their goals. So superheroes originally weren't exactly what we think of them today. They were, if you look at original Superman comics, he was fighting slumlords in the streets more so than like flying through the air and shooting laser beams out of his eyes. He did a lot of that stuff, but not only that stuff. He was a little bit more grounded than what we think of now for Superman. He was more addressing issues of the time.
Yeah, that makes me think of what are the issues of our time that we're trying to address with superheroes like the Avengers and Batman versus Superman. We're trying to address bad movies, and maybe it's a product of capitalism. It's an evolution of the hero from even before Arthur's time.
Yeah. In one way or another, he's helped to raise them up, and they created a hero amongst their battles, a hero to sort of cling to at this time during their struggles when they're struggling with battle and losses.
Well, I don't know about the word cling. It just, for me, when I hear the word cling, I think of something Barack Obama said in 2008, was that people cling to their guns. And that really means a lot. People see symbols in firearms of violence and fear, and some people see symbols of protection and freedom and sport. It's that clinging that people didn't like at the time. It really emphasizes that sense of desperation, which, yeah, it was a difficult time for the Britons, with Arthur being their medieval superhero, so they clung to him. They were being colonized. That's a desperate situation. And, well, clinging works. But unlike clinging to guns as a symbol, clinging to heroes as a symbol, it isn't the same. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? What do you think?
Yeah, that's like our basorexia, right? Like, it's how you interpret the word and what it means to you.
Yeah, great point.
Like, if I had used words like hold up or embrace or grasp.
So these are all synonyms?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're synonyms, but they all have some nuance to them. They have different, well, maybe not basorexia, like that queer urge, but it's the same idea of they mean different things. Like, for me, hold up means like a worship. Embrace means hug. And grasp, well, when I hear the word grasp, I think of Patrick Star from SpongeBob. Grasp it
Firmly grasp it.
Yeah, they're different words with different definitions, but the context and individual interpretation is based on personal experience.
Okay, so for you, does clinging negate heroism, like I was kind of thinking of originally?
It doesn't feel negative, but I can see where it might. Oh, here, I looked up some other synonyms, and unite is a synonym for cling.
In the middle of the podcast, you took your phone out?
Yeah.
That's good. I think that's the right idea. Unite. People cling to or unite themselves with a heroic idea. Not literally because it's an idea, but figuratively.
Yeah, the symbol touches something inside them.
Oh my.
Touches something inside them, it becomes part of them. They unite with it. They are one. But really, I guess it's more like the heroic figure harkening back to something like Hercules or other Greek-era heroes.
Yeah, like Hercules and Theseus were heroic figures, strong and capable, but it really wows me to think of this unbroken chain of heroic figures, heroes and heroines, like Hercules and Theseus, Arthur and Hermaphrodite and Aphrodite, and Hermes, and Joan of Arc. Well, do we want to wade into that idea that religions are formed around superheroes?
We can, but I think it might be more like heroes exist within religions, but I'm not sure that they actually form around heroes.
Yeah, it's a chicken and the egg problem. The worshiper and the hero, which came first?
But I think my point is, by clinging or uniting, they're thinking and feeling, this is the one. He's going to help us. He's going to bring us together and help us defeat our enemies.
It's a common theme through time. Where did it come from? Where does it go?
Nah, Joe.
Where does it take us? But it exemplifies how Arthuriana has come so far and evolved so much. Like, Arthur has evolved so much today, and you were saying, like, Superman has changed so much just in the past 100 years or so.
Yeah, I think it's definitely fascinating to look at the evolution of what a heroic character means at different points in time and how it reflects the times and what was important to people.
Yeah, it was a shared cultural idea that they had. They had all had similar experiences and heard stories, and they had this Arthur-like figure in their collective cultural consciousness. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, this poem is a perfect example of that the Arthurian mythos was embedded in British culture by the early 7th century. It's known in Arthuriana circles because it compares a warrior at the battle to an Arthur-like figure. Not just any Arthur-like figure, but a specific person who was named Arthur. And when we read this, you picked up on something there, Kelly. The first line there says, he pierced 300 most bold.
Yeah, my literature major brain saw pierced and immediately thought penetration, which obviously could be, something to use as a queer interpretation, but I don't know the exact word that was used as I don't speak Welsh. So I'm reading it in English and reading pierced, and well, I'm sure it's talking about a sword. I don't know what word was used and if it has any other context.
Yes, exactly. That literature brain you're talking about, that's the basorexia of our methodology. And it's authentic, too. I looked at the history of this word. It's from Old Welsh, and my Welsh friend said it was a pretty decent translation I did, but, well, let's say it's more of an indecent translation.
Oh.
I'm going to post it on social media and have a little write-up on our blog.
So last time we talked about how all the lords were pooling their resources to strengthen themselves and the area, correct?
Right.
This poem is sort of doing that in a different way. It's giving them that shared identity of they've gone through these battles and, things, right, to keep their land. And they've created this Arthur character to rally behind, I guess. And, that's our hero who is going to defeat everyone in battle. Right?
Yeah, I think you're right. What I like about this poem is that it is an artistic representation of that same idea. Last time we talked about the politics of the lords pooling their resources, and now we're talking about how that same process was reflected in the art of the time. That's our hermeneutic. We're looking at all these different horizons and the fusion of horizons. So the fusion of horizons isn't just when our perspective runs up against the perspective of the author, but it's all the other different perspectives of those time periods.
So this was more almost as like that's the word I want. Not nationalist. That's not the word I want. Patriotic. Almost more of like a patriotic thing. Like we're all coming together with our Arthur flag. We all salute the Arthur flag together and pool our resources under it.
Right, through the political machinations and the heroic poetry. It was around this time that the native Britons of that northwestern region of Great Britain started using the word they use today to describe themselves, Cymru. And it comes from Latin meaning compatriot. Through the heroic poetry of Welsh bards such as Afan Ferdig, as well as the eulogy of Tenby and the great prophecy of Britain, which appealed to all Brythonic peoples to unite against the Anglo-Saxons, this nationalistic philosophy contributed to British victories in their fight against the Anglo-Saxons, such as at Devoudan in 733, the First Battle of Hereford in 735, Cornwall in 753, and the Second Battle of Hereford in 760.
And the Britons would have seen these victories not only as military triumphs, but as confirmation of their own cultural identity, their language and customs in a ever-changing world.
But defeats, such as at the Battle of Heavenfield, where King Oswald of Northumbria defeated Welsh King Cadwallon, the defeat at Catterick in 638, at Bradford on Avon in 650, Winwade in 655, Taunton in 710, He Hill in 720, and Carno Mountain in 728, pushed the native Britons past the River Severn. And by 780, King Offa of Mercia sought to gain the upper hand in these battles by building a defensive structure, an earthenwork dyke, 177 miles long, 65 feet wide, and 8 feet tall, that to this day roughly follows the border between Wales and England.
That's a big dike.
Big dike energy.
All right. So, because of the nature of our particular podcast, I think we should address the elephant in the room that Dyke has historically, and I'm sure still, is used as a slur for specifically lesbian women. But we do see cases of it being reclaimed, right? There's like the group Dykes on Bikes, and I've definitely seen it around other places.
I'm really glad you recognize that. That's the basorexia we're talking about. I think people of a different mindset might say that that's infantile, but I totally disagree because it is a real mental process that happens. And to neglect our mental processes, especially if it's connected to sex, is reflective of a history of sexual oppression. But finishing up this section, although battles between the Welsh and Anglo-Saxons continued, in 789, Vikings landed at Portland. That's Portland in England, not that nearby us.
Oh. Yeah, I wondered why they would want to go to Portland.
It was probably the legal weed.
Oh, it probably was the weed.
No, this is...
I love it.
No, the first of Viking raids of Britain... In 789, Vikings landed at Portland, the first of Viking raids of Britain that would last for the next 250 years.
They really wanted that weed.
Computer, zoom in! Zooming in on the author with our hermeneutic satellite, let's look at Nennius, a figure from early medieval Britain. He was a historian and monk, believed to have lived in the 9th century. He lived in an area of Wales bordering Mercia and Wessex, and was trained by Elfydd of Bangor. Bangor is the oldest city in Wales, and home to the Cathedral at Bangor, which was built in 530 CE on land gifted by Milgwyn, the king of Gwynedd.
So that's Malgo, right? Who we talked about before? Who became a monk but then left the church, right?
Yeah, Malgo Cune, wet with wine pressed from the vine of Sodom. Nennius lived and worked in the land gifted by Malgo. As a monk and historian, he wrote in Latin. The
Women
scholarly.
in Latin. Were his writings a little bit more uplifting?
They were still pretty judgy, like Gildas's. The Historia Brittonum, or History of the Britons, mirrors the concerns of earlier writers like Gildas. It's often regarded as polemical and emphasizes the moral and political issues. But that's the fusion of horizons, a concern about morals and politics.
Concerns about morals, but not ethics?
Yeah, interesting. That's a good point. The fusion of horizons is difficult sometimes. I don't think morals are as much of a concern to us today as they were in medieval times. But ethics is a word we use for concerns about good and bad and right and wrong today. But I'm still curious about morals, and I'm not sure if there's a better way to fuse our horizons beyond just saying morals and ethics are similar. For example, I'm disgusted by police violence and I support Black Lives Matter, but is that an ethical concern? A moral concern? Both? Moving on. The satellite got some cloud cover, some moralistic, ethical cloud cover. The Historia Brittonum, it played a role in preserving and disseminating historical knowledge in this period when written records faced many challenges. It was a part of this evolving tradition of chronicling historical events and legends and laid a foundation for subsequent manuscript culture. Monks like Nennius worked in a scriptorium using a quill made from feathers and wrote on vellum made from calfskin or parchment made from other animal skin to write, copy, illuminate, and selectively preserve information.
So that sounds like making a manuscript was a lot of labor-intensive work.
Yeah, and guess who was benefiting from all that labor?
The higher-ups.
Yeah, the rich, the wealthy.
And the monks.
Yeah, the rich. I mean, the monks kept some for themselves in their libraries, and they were loath to share it with others. But that
probably only changed with the advent of the printing press, right?
All thanks to Gutenberg. Let's zoom in now to the text. The history of the Britons has many complex layers because it has multiple narrative styles.
Well, that seems unreliable.
Yeah, it mentions real battles, but then combines that with legendary accounts from different sources.
Legendary? Oh my gosh. He's here! Arthur!
He's coming! Yeah, it's the earliest surviving sources that treats Arthur as a historical figure. Unlike Egedavin, which used the concept of an Arthur-type figure as a standard of comparison, in chapter 56 of the Historia, it recounts 12 actual battles of Arthur. Well, actual in air quotes.
Of course. So, for a lot of people, us included, 12 is sort of infused with the Christian numerology. 12 disciples or 12 tribes of Israel, right?
And 12 is a factor of the number of perfect individuals raised to heaven after Armageddon. 12 times 12 times 1,000 is 144,000.
I've never heard that.
Is it a revelation to you?
Boo. That was really good. So
Thank you.
So why is 12 such an important number? Today we say a dozen.
Yeah, I think 12 is important because, well, we count on our fingers, but how do you count past 10 on your fingers? Well, if you take your hand, look at your fingers, not counting your thumb, look at your 4 fingers, there are 3 sections on each finger. And so 3 times 4 is 12. So you can use your thumb to point to each section of your fingers, and so you can count to 12 on one hand.
Blowing my mind right now. Okay, so 12 battles. The River Glane, 4 at the River Dubglas, the River Bassus, Caledon Forest, Gwynedd Fortress, City of Legion, River Tribrute, Mount Agnet, and Mount Baden. And I have no idea if I pronounced any of that correctly.
Mount Baden, remember, was the Baden Hill or Mons Badonicus from last time. Mount Badonkadonk. But more importantly, the Historia brings out that Arthur wasn't just some comparative figure like in Egedavin. He wasn't just some sort of king. It says he was a Dux Bellorum, a war leader. Some sort of position appointed by the many other kings of Britain.
Sort of like Eisenhower was the commander of Allied forces in World War II. Arthur was the commander of forces of the kingdoms of the Celtic Britons.
Now let's get to the queer stuff. Not just zooming in on the text, but looking at the text with a queer lens. The first basarexic urge I had when reading this was on page 5, when it says that Arthur bore the image of the Holy Virgin Mary. It's that first word, bore.
And why is that queer for you?
I'm glad you asked. The original Latin for the word bore is portuat. No, that's not right. The original Latin for that word bore is portavit, sharing a root word with transport. It translates to English as carry, and ultimately it's from a reconstructed Proto-Indo-European root word meaning carry forth or go through.
Okay, so why is that queer?
Well, translations can be queer depending on the translator's choices. White chose to use the translation of Historia Britonum by Sir E.K. Chambers, which translates the portavit word as bear, which would be back translated into Latin as pharaoh.
And why is it queer?
If translators can pick and choose words like this, whatever makes sense for them in their cultural and linguistic context, what stops us from doing the same thing?
So you're choosing to translate it in a queer way.
Right. For example, where the Chambers translation says Arthur bore the image of the Holy Virgin Mary, it could just say burdened by the image of the Holy Virgin Mary.
But burdened implies difficult responsibility.
Okay, how about this? Since the Chambers translation just uses an entirely different root word, let's go with bind, from the Proto-Indo-European root word meaning to tie. Arthur was bound to the image of the Holy Virgin Mary, which, unlike that idea of a difficult responsibility, adds the question of consent. Was Arthur bound non-consensually, as in an abduction by police, or consensually, as a metaphorical pact between friends?
Definitely makes me think of, folklore and fiction tales, mythologies of someone being bound to a deity, sometimes even against their will.
I like that. And you saying that makes me think of Dungeons and Dragons. The Warlock class has a patron.
Oh, you play D&D?
Yeah, I play D&D. Speaking of patrons, maybe we can play with some listeners sometime.
Ooh.
But since we're talking about consent, and the Proto-Indo-European root word of bind is to tie up, how about bondage? Arthur was in bondage to the Holy Virgin Mary. I like this idea of bondage to Mary. Well, it's irreverent, but it brings to mind the idea of Mary as a dominatrix.
We're going straight to hell.
Helling comes from a Germanic word for to dig, so you can hell your potatoes. We're going straight to helling our potatoes.
I love potatoes.
Oh, Papa. Enough of that. Zooming out. The original text does use a specific word that different translators have interpreted differently over time. And the only limit to a translation laden with queer themes seems to be the efforts of the translator. So for an authentic interpretation as the Virgin Mary as dominatrix, I would be looking for something in the text about domination, submission, or sadomasochism, but it's not there. That's why this utterance scores a -1 on the queer authenticity scale, being slightly inauthentic. Now, on page 6, it says men came. The men are meeting to erect a monument.
Oh, right, for Arthur's dog.
Yes, a dog erection.
No.
This sort of thing has always happened where men meet up to participate in some shared activity as friends or mentors, which is called homosociality. A term popularized by queer theorist Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick. Homosociality comes from root words homo, referring to same-gendered, and sociality, meaning a type of relationship. Homosociality is not bad in itself, but it is part of institutions that maintain a patriarchal hegemony. Kind of like how all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. All patriarchy is homosocial, but not all homosociality is patriarchal. That's because homosociality can serve an important biological function. Have you seen A Beautiful Mind?
I saw it when it came out. It had Jennifer Connelly. That's mostly what I remember.
Cute. And it had Russell Crowe. But it was about John Nash, a Nobel Prize winner, who was definitely not as cute as Russell Crowe. But there's this one scene where the protagonist is working on a problem in the bar with his friends, and in comes walking in a group of young ladies, and their eyes all fall on one particular woman they call the blonde, which is kind of objectifying.
Just a little.
Yeah, maybe really objectifying. One of Nash's friends recounts the teachings of the original free market economist, Adam Smith, who said, "In competition, individual ambition serves the common good." And they all repeat it together like some sort of chant or mantra.
So in other words, every man for himself.
Yeah, that's the philosophy of the free market. But Nash geniusly realizes that each of the friends in competition will all block each other, so no one will be successful. And each one, failing their first preference, will go off to another one of the ladies. But each of those ladies, realizing they are the second choice, will also reject each of the friends. But Nash points out that if they cooperate, then each of the friends will be successful, although their mate for that night wasn't their first choice. But this understanding of cooperation, as opposed to competition as the best form of economic activity, which is called game theory, is what won Nash a Nobel Prize. Later iterations of game theory applied the same ideas to biological evolution. So the situation between Nash and his friends in the bar, as depicted in the movie, would be similar to the earliest patterns of human mating. If humans had not cooperated homosocially to collectively be most successful in choosing a mate, then the species would have died off.
A little bit less survival of the fittest there, huh?
Right, it's not every man for himself, it's let's cooperate and we can all get laid. Zooming out, the text portrays a classic example of homosociality, where men work together to build a monument to their lost pet that serves the important social functioning of sharing grief. That is why this utterance scores a 2 on the queer authenticity scale and is authentically queer. And the final basorexic urge from this selection from the White Anthology was on page 6. It says, the top of the pile, from that same section about the dog erection.
No.
Nennius recounts some sort of miracle that a rock with the dog's paw print on it appeared at the top of the pile in the morning after the men erected the dog monument. Besides this being some sort of miracle that the commemorative rock somehow moved from one location to another without human intervention, it implies that something on top is good and even better than being on the bottom. As discussed in the last episode, the Roman conception of sexual relationships firmly places the penetrative partner, or the top, as the one who retains honor. This prioritization of relative location or direction is common in language. For example, rise above or fall below, chirp up or come down, getting high or feeling low. I've tried to notice this in my own writing. For example, I sometimes replace the phrase over and above with under and below. whereas over and above implies the next item's importance is certain and obvious, under and below implies the next item's importance is suppressed and nuanced. Zooming out, the text uses the word top, which in some cases is used to describe a sexual encounter, and in fact, being the top was important in Roman conceptions of sexuality. Being on top does pervade our language as being a positive, but the text uses it largely to reinforce the theme of legends and miracles, in an effort to persuade the audience of the validity of King Arthur. That is why this utterance scores a 0 on the queer authenticity scale, being neither inauthentically nor authentically queer.
Going forward, this is where our announcements will be, and hopefully you're listening in June 2024, and we're a part of our virtual launch party. Even if you weren't, consider joining our community on Patreon.
And join our queer retinue. And if you do, you can get access to our community Discord channel. And barring that, you can follow us on all the social media platforms.
And this is the part of the episode where we say thank you.
Thank you to our friends and family for their support.
Thank you to our patrons.
Thank you to Andrew Chard for providing recording equipment.
And thank you to all of our listeners. This wouldn't be possible without you. Thank you.
We acknowledge this podcast was recorded on the traditional land of the Squaxin Island tribe and Nisqually Indian tribe. But now that you know a bit about our authentic queer interpretation of homosociality in Arthurian legend, let me leave you with this. When is homosociality patriarchal, and when is it not? Stay chivalrous, queerthers.